motion. We were hoping that this would be a physical meeting, but you'll all be aware of the rail strikes, and with most of our members living somewhere away from London, it proved impossible to get together. So hopefully this will be the last one, but that's not within our control. Just a few words of introduction, and then I'll begin the formal business of the meeting. I have an apology from Jora Gill, one of our board members. He may be able to join us later on, but I suspect not. And Rebecca Lloyd-Jones, our Chief Legal Officer, has continued to be on jury. She's been jury service. She's been there for about 8 weeks now, so obviously an interesting trial. I also wanted to welcome Sean O'Kelly, who's just joined us, both as a Chief Inspector and as a board member. We seem to be having a few connection problems with Sean, so I'm going to ask Ian Trenholm to just introduce him at an appropriate time later on. And can I, last but by no means least, welcome this month's Equality Network representative, who's Sariat Olatunji. Welcome, Sariat, to this meeting. If I move on then, the formal business, are there any declarations of interest that people need to declare? Okay. We circulated the minutes of our last meeting. They're here for approval. Do people have any comments, or can I take those as approved?
Approved, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. We then have the matters arising. My apologies. My screen glitched there. There is only one item on the corporate performance report. There were some things that we want to clarify. That is on track, and we'll do that at a future meeting. So that's showing as a green status on the grounds that it will happen by the due date. So I have no other comments to make unless there are any queries. In that case, could we just move straight on to the executive team's report? This is for noting and commenting as board members may wish. Ian, I think the first 4 or 5 items are all down to you, so perhaps I'd hand to you.
Thanks very much, Ian. So I think if I can ask board members to take the first section as read, there are 3 things that I particularly want to draw attention to. One is pressure across the system, one is the leadership review, and one is board changes. So I think in terms of pressure across the system, there are a couple of specific areas that we're concerned around, ambulances and maternity. And I think what that is they are tangible symptoms of enormous pressure across health and care systems. I think I very much recognise that there's a public narrative that the world is somehow back to normal. And we see, as we see in many parts of our lives, we can continue to go about our normal business. And certainly the news media tend to talk about delays to check in for holidays rather than delays at the doors of general practice or emergency departments. But I think we're seeing on the ground that those delays are very real and are very tangible and are very important. So I think this does remain a concern for us. And we've been looking at ambulance services in particular recently, where we've got some concerns around leadership and culture in some places, and we'll be continuing to talk about that over the next few months. And there are specific providers where we've taken action, or we've asked for additional support to be brought in. I think as I think many people are saying again and again, the long-term answer to this pressure, though, has to be found at system level. It's about how individual providers work collaboratively together to come up with responses to addressing this pressure in a particular place. And our response from a CQC point of view is inevitably limited by the powers that we have. But I think what we have tried to do is to bring together frontline professionals to understand the problem in some detail, but also to help improve collaboration between organisations. We know that we have a very powerful convening power, which we know, if used well, can bring people together and can start to have conversations that maybe they wouldn't otherwise have had on their own. And in all cases, what we try and do when we bring people together is to try and come up with practical things that people can use, enhanced guidance and so on, that people can use to try and improve the services. So again, there's a steady stream of those products. I want to move on to talk about leadership and the leadership review. The leadership review was carried out recently by Sir Gordon Messenger and Dame Linda Pollard, and that report was publicised recently. There are some recommendations for us in that report, and I'm pleased that they are already areas we've been doing some work on, and they will be embedded within our single assessment framework. One of the real positives about our single assessment framework work is that we're looking to try and bring in one place all of the work we do around providers and systems. And when new insights come from things like Sir Gordon's review, Sir Gordon and Dame Linda's reviews come out, we can very quickly integrate them into our core assessment methodology and start going out and testing the degree to which those recommendations have been adopted in the system. So I'm hoping that from the end of this calendar year, that single assessment framework we're bringing in will be a really important tool and will help, I think, amplify some of the recommendations that come out through a range of different views, both the ones that we know about in the past, but also those reviews that are to come. And finally, the third area that I wanted to talk about, that's been a big part of what I've been involved in over the last few weeks, is around board changes. We recently announced that Rosie will be leaving us. Rosie Bennyworth will be leaving us at the end of July to join the Healthcare Safety Investigation Branch as their interim chief investigator, and Kirsty Shaw will be leaving us at the end of August to become the chief operating officer at Homes England. I think it'd be fair to say both Rosie and Kirsty have played really pivotal roles in the development of CQC over the last few years, and I think both of them will leave really significant legacies. And I'm sorry to see both of them go, but I also know that both of them are going on to really important and high-profile public service jobs, and they'll continue to with their respective. Their respective significant contributions to public service will be continued in their new roles. We will, of course, have the opportunity to say a proper thanks to both Rosie and Kirsty at our July meeting and thank them properly for their contributions. But I wanted just to announce that publicly. And I think I am now going to pause and I hope welcome Sean O'Kelly to the call. I think Sean is now on the call, so I'm going to ask Sean just to say a few words by way of introduction. Sean, welcome as our new Chief Inspector of Hospitals. Might be on mute, I think.
Sorry, thank you. Yes, apologies for joining a little bit late. I had some issues with the IT. I hope you can hear me now. Just to say, yes, it's great to have joined. It's great to be in this position. I look forward very much to working with everyone on the board and the whole of the CQC staff. I've just come from the East of England, where I was recently acting as the regional director. Before that, I was essentially the regional medical director for the East of England for the last few years. I've also been the medical director for NHS Improvement, working with trusts in special measures and challenge provider status, and before that, medical director in three trusts, small, medium and large, in the southwest of England. In the past, I've had experience at the Department of Health, working with the DCMO and the CMO, and prior to that, a period of time in the US as an associate professor of pediatric cardiac anesthesia, which is my professional background. So, as I said, I'm very much looking forward to working with everyone and helping the CQC achieve its objectives and its mission. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Ian.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sean. Thanks. And so, can I just echo Ian's welcome to the board and welcome to the executive team. So I think in light of both Sean joining us on Monday and of course colleagues are starting to leave us, I'll be putting putting in place some interim arrangements. Sean will be doing his core job of Chief Inspector of Hospitals, but also he'll be acting as interim Chief Inspector of Primary Medical Services and working with colleagues within the Director Group and the Regulatory Leadership function to offer medical leadership in the Primary Medical Services area. Kate will be taking on leadership of the Integrated Care System work alongside becoming the interim Chief Operating Officer. Other executives will of course take on specific additional duties and will be liaising with external stakeholders to cover particular meetings and types of work to make sure that both Rosie and Kirsty's responsibilities are covered in the interim work. And over the next few months we'll be reflecting on what we need from an executive point of view and be looking to potentially make additional recruitments and so on to cover specific areas. We will of course be looking at the way we use our director cadre, the next tier down, as well as our national professional advisor cadre, again, who are an important part of what we do. And again, we'll be talking about how we'll be using them more overtly. But in the short term, I'm redistributing Kirsty and Rosie's responsibilities across the current team with support from the next tier down. So I think that's all I really wanted to say in for now. So happy to take questions on that section or move on as you wish. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Robert. Francis.
Thank you very much, Ian, for that, and may I welcome Sean to the party. And probably if I'd asked this question next time, he'd be happy to answer it rather than you, Ian. But it's about leadership and what you've said, and sort of drawing some threads together. Really, the first from about the Messenger report, and I should probably declare that I was amongst those whom he interviewed. And I just wondered to what extent a report which is said to be radical in many ways changes our perception of how we assess leadership in the terms of our regulatory function, or does it not? And allied to that is what you've reported about the ambulance services. We all know what terrible pressure the ambulance services have been under up and down the country, but underlying what you've told us and what I think we've known for some time is that certainly in some ambulance services, maybe many of them, there is an underlying cultural leadership issue. And I wonder bearing in mind the length of time that has been going on, I wonder what we are able to do to, as it were, change that picture, because it strikes me that from the point of view of the patient and the public, that the issue's been going on for too long, and these are of course challenging times, but it has been going on too long. So it's really, they both come up fortuitously at the same time, but they do seem to either have some association.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. I think one of the things that's really important about our single assessment framework is that it is a set of questions that link back to the 5 key questions that you are responsible for creating. But what we need to do as a regulator is to find ways to take the insights that are offered by things like the Messenger Review, and indeed insights from other academic research, because I think there is a fair amount of academic research in safety culture, but I'm not sure we have then extracted that in a systematic way so that the questions we ask are the set of questions that one would use to try and define culture. Because I think the danger, I think, and is that we talk about culture in a slightly qualitative way and sort of say we know good culture when we see it and we know bad culture when we see it. I think one of our challenges is to try and codify that in some way, and that's not an easy activity, as as we know. But I think the fact that we have now been in business for a decade now as CQC, I think we have created a body of knowledge there. We know that there's an increasing interest in academia around this. Reports like the Messenger report, I think, are also really important. And I think what we need to do is to extract all of that and then embed it into a series of questions. And you know, my hypothesis, and I wouldn't dignify it any more than this, is there's 15, maybe 20 questions that, when taken together, that pick up context and behaviours at a local level, will give us almost a definition of culture in almost a numerical way. Now that's a big ambition, I guess, but I think unless we can strive for that bold ambition, then we will all be continuing, and by us and everyone else in the system will continue to talk about culture in a slightly abstract way. So I think that's something we can do very, very specifically. In terms of ambulance services specifically, we've got a programme of work we're doing to look at what's going on in ambulances, particularly working with NHS England and Department of Health and Social Care colleagues as well. And I'm hoping that will give us some insights. But I think there is still this what is culture question, which I think I'm determined that we can try and distill down and be much clearer about what that means and how it's defined.
Thanks, Ian. Any other questions for Ian Trello? Okay, if not, Rosie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ian. And following on the conversation about ambulances and urgent and emergency care, my first report talks about the work we're doing in urgent and emergency care. And as you are aware, we've recently been into 10 systems and scheduled all of our inspections across the urgent and emergency care pathway. And that's given us a huge amount of information, both at system level, but also when we've aggregated that together. In addition to that, we held a really good workshop with 250 stakeholders from across the urgent emergency care system, both at local level and national stakeholders. And our plan is to pull that information together to pull out the learning and to be able to share that best practice that we've been seeing in advance of next winter, so that actually systems can see and learn from what we've experienced over the last few months. So that work is underway. The second section of my report is just to flag that Claire Fuller has released her report around primary care and integrating primary care in the ICS landscape. We very much welcome this report, and we're bringing a paper to the July board to have a further discussion about this, as I think it's really a critical piece of work looking at the future of primary care and the future of integration at neighbourhood level. So very much welcome that.
Thanks, Rosie. Any questions for Rosie's 2 comments there? No. Okay, shall we move on? Kate, I think there are a number of things down for you.
Okay, thanks, and good morning all. So I'm just going to bring together the update on local authority assurance and integrated care system assurance, and let the board know that we've made really good progress in identifying 2 local authorities and 2 integrated care systems who are interested in being. They suggested that we don't call it a pilot, that we call it a kind of test and learn approach, where we go out and we work through our methodology with those volunteering places to ensure that our proposed approach to how we assure local authorities and ICSs from April 23 is robust and is effective. So a big thank you to those 4 places to enable that to happen. In order to deliver that, we've been successful in recruiting a small internal team who will be leading this work with some expertise that we're also drawing on from the sector. And the output of those test and learn pieces of work will be an opportunity to for us to reflect on our methodology and to make sure that we are plugging in the right requirements when we think about the digital platform we're building, when we think about the skills and capabilities and capacity we need in the organisation to deliver this ambitious programme from April 23. So good progress on those 2 fronts. And then just a brief note, liberty protection safeguards, the consultation from the Department of Health and Social Care is live at the moment. We're in the middle of submitting our response to that. It's not only about the new liberty protection safeguards, but it's also about revisions to the Mental Capacity Act codes of practice. So quite a kind of technical response about the codes of practice, just to make board aware. And there will be opportunities at a later date for us to spend some more time together thinking about our potential role around liberty protection safeguards as well. The Department of Health and Social Care said they want to digest all the feedback they get from the consultation first before they then consider when a potential go live date may be. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Kate. Quite a range of points there. Any questions for my board colleagues for Kate? Mark Saxton, and then Belinda. Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. Kate, thanks for the report on local authority assurance and ICS. I was going to say pilots, but I'll demonstrate my quick learning and go test and learn exercises. I mean, this is really good news, but I just wondered how we got to select the participants. I wondered if it was to do with patient acuity or whether it was to do with inequalities or resourcing challenges that we know the sector suffers from. I just wondered if you can give some background to that and perhaps what you're hoping to learn from this exercise.
Okay, so shall I do local authority first, and then Rosie, you might want to. So for local authority, obviously already established, unlike integrated care systems, we wanted to make sure we had a good geographical spread, so that we were looking at different types of geographies when it came to those two local authorities. And Rosie, do you want to come in on the ICS rationale?
Yes. Certainly, we had a selection of criteria looking at, again, a mix of different demographics, geographical spread, size of ICSs, and the two ICSs we have chosen are very different in terms of their makeup, their size, their demographics, and the kind of inequalities that might be visible in those ICSs. So we very much looked at getting as broad a spectrum. And what we're trying to learn is really we've done a huge amount of co-production with stakeholders to get to this point in terms of developing our methodology. We've worked extensively with most of the systems across the country and national stakeholders. And we're really starting to put that into practice in terms of this is what we think our methodology should look like, and how does that actually work in practice, and does it tease out those areas sufficiently enough that's going to really add value to an integrated care system in terms of regulation and how it works.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. And just in terms of timing for both exercises, can we just understand when we can expect some feedback?
Yeah, so they're going to be happening through July and August, Mark. So we will be digesting the output of that come the end of August, and then there'll be a conversation in September. So there'll be a formal process where the output of our learning will go to the exec team, and then a conversation at board. So in the next 2 months, there'll be lots of busy work on these test and learn places.
Very good, thank you.
The lexicon changes, test and learn, not pilot. Belinda.
Yeah, it's just a quick question for Kate. You haven't mentioned care home visiting. I know you often mention it, so I'm just wondering if that's improved and you're not getting the number of complaints that you used to get about it.
Thanks, Belinda. So so we haven't stopped our focus on this. So our expectation now is that there aren't restrictions and people are able to see their loved ones as they wish to. So it's still a key area of focus when we go out into every care home. We are still getting a small number of concerns raised by individuals, families that we follow up, as we have been doing, particularly over the last 6 months, with a real focus on what that is about. So yeah, I think this is the first month in maybe 24 months that I haven't mentioned visiting, but it doesn't mean we haven't stopped our focus on it, Belinda, when we've been going out and inspecting.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, Kate, thanks very much. I mean, if you just look back at the points that have been raised there's a combination of current and go forward points, but a number of observations about the current state of things, which obviously we were reflecting in our state of care report coming up later this year. Let's move on to internal operations. Tyson.
Thank you, Ian. On performance, not much to add to the written report. I'd like to say how grateful I am to the operations teams for a strong performance in May, despite various distractions like half term, the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, and our team is being encouraged to participate in a steady drumbeat of transformation communications as our transformation programme really quickens pace. But having said that, I just want to pull out two areas and expand on those slightly. The first on registration. Really strong performance, 3,264 applications completed in May. That's compared to 2,795 in April, a 15% uplift. And on average, that's 512 better than the preceding 2-month period. And also, despite demand and the number of applications coming in still being very strong, the overall number of applications in the system remains steady. So I think strong performance in May on registration. And finally, just really to highlight our inspection performance, which has also remained strong, notwithstanding all I said about at the beginning about what else has been going on in May. 998 inspections were undertaken in May. That compares to 920 in April, and we have 995 inspections either planned or have already been undertaken for June. So just to add a few numbers to the written report that was submitted a week ago. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks. I have a question as well, but let Mark Saxton, you go first.
Thank you, Chairman. Tyson, thanks a lot, and congratulations on the registration performance and also the improvement in timeliness. It's really good to see. In terms of inspection volumes, I just wondered, could you give me a little bit of an insight into the split between the physical crossing I forget the words that we use, sorry, but crossing the threshold and also the DMA. And I just wondered whether the inspection performance or volumes have in any way been challenged this month because of the problems with transport access.
Thanks, Mark. On your first point, these are all physical crossing the threshold inspections. The DMA, the performance of the DMA team is counted separately and comes together with our overall figures on regulatory contact, and their performance remains strong. But the figures I've just given you are physical crossing the threshold that our inspection teams have done. In terms of the transport, I mean, transport disruption. These figures were for May, so they would have covered the tube strike in London, a 2-day tube strike in London, and I think that I think the impact upon our operations was minimal, largely because I think where our teams were due out on inspection and they were expecting there to be some disruption, they would have travelled by public transport the night before and probably stayed overnight. I shadowed an inspection of an independent hospital in central London on the first of the days of the London Underground strike in London, and the teams were already there by the time I arrived. I live in London. I was able to walk once I'd got off the train at Charing Cross, but the teams were already there. So I think the impact on us within the CQC has been fairly minimal, and I'm expecting that to be the pattern for June as well. Thank you very much. Good to hear.
And Tyson, thank you to the staff for their commitment in ensuring that's the case. Sally.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, and thanks, Tyson. Just to pick up on your last comment, actually, around regulatory and inspection activity more generally. So we're obviously delivering 1,000, roughly, crossing the threshold inspections every month, which is a significant achievement. But you said that didn't include our direct monitoring work. So can you give us a sense of how many of the people that we regulate we're kind of touching over a year, really? I think there's sometimes a perception that we don't see people for a very long time, and clearly there's an awful lot of activity. I think there are three elements of this, and
One is the number of physical inspections. One is the amount of monitoring we do as a result of the DMA team, and the third one is a quality statement that we publish on the website, having used our intelligence and data to look at those providers that we think are probably of less risk to us. And I think from memory, overall, we will be impacting on about. I think Chris Asher has talked before about impacting on about is it 70% of all providers during the course of the year, but I'll check that figure, Sally, and make sure that if I've got it very wide of the mark, I'll correct it in the minutes. But yes, it's a lot more than the physical inspection. We now have quite a complex arsenal in order to keep an eye on quality across the system.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think it just gives people a sense.
Thank you.
Thanks. Tyson, just quickly for me, actually one of my questions already asked by Mark, but the other is on the registration teams. You said a high volumes of application, they processed applications. Am I right in saying that to some extent that is tackling into a pre-existing backlog? So when we talk about processing applications, that's one we receive, but we're either staying on top of or eating into the backlog. And then can you just say a couple of words about the technological improvements we're making in this area?
The backlog has actually gone up over the last period, and that's because I mean the way in which we count the backlog is quite complex. But strictly speaking, the backlog has increased because the managers have been working on their existing workload rather than sort of opening things up, being in progress and reducing the backlog. We thought it better to do that than just to focus on the backlog. But I'm fairly confident that as a result of a lot of long-running process changes and also some changes to the way in which we present the data, so on our Power BI pages, so that I think our teams are better able to see exactly what's going on. We're able to make some progress, and I think although performance in registration has tended to go up and down over the months, it does look as if we have continued to make some good inroads into it. In terms of the technological advances, those are broadly connected with the regulatory platform, and there's a lot of work going on with the teams, including training for the team, so that they can take advantage of the regulatory platform, and that will also have quite a big impact on our providers and those who are applying for registration, because it will make it a lot more seamless when it comes to their interactions with us.
Okay, thanks. I think it would be useful just to keep an eye on the backlog, given the importance of people coming into the market. But thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
I see we have guests for the next session who already joined, so perhaps if we can deal with the remaining items reasonably quickly. Mark, there wasn't really anything in your written report. Is there anything you wish to add?
No, just to confirm that this month there's no significant cyber or information security issues to report.
Okay. In that case, can I just turn finally to Chris Day, your parliamentary and engagement update, and then we'll take any questions.
Super. 4 quick items from me. We've recently met with the Shadow Minister of Health to discuss the Ockenden report and our role in regulating maternity services. You'll know, colleagues, last time we talked a bit about the maternity roundtable that we were due to have just before the last board. The roundtable went very well. It was a really good listening event, co-designed with stakeholders and both providers and people who use services. The report from that event still being finalised, but there are probably 3 or 4 themes that are particularly important. Obviously, staffing pressures is one, and a lot of conversations from the midwives who took part saying that they were a lot of them have felt they're in sort of survival mode, and there was a real sense of midwives sometimes taking the option of retiring early rather than maintaining their sort of role as a midwife. And but actually at the same time, lots of really good examples of how teams were turning it around and what teams are doing differently to support retention and growth. There's a lot about cross-team working. What does good care look like from different perspectives? How do people's ability to speak up when things go wrong? How do you create an open culture versus a blame culture? And how do you support that by really good training that operates together, where people are working together? And that cross-team working also moved over into close, trusting, respectful multi-professional teams and team working. There was also a sense that if staff felt safe, then it was more likely to lead to patient safety as well. So from that round table, the next steps are to finalise a full report with an output that will look to talk a little bit about what it means to be well led in maternity services, and focused on later, and perhaps lead to some other partnerships that we might do later in the year. We also wanted to give a practical guide for those supporting midwife services, rather like the patient first, so we can get a real what are the things that good midwifery services are doing. So that's something we want to take forward. Second item, I just want to talk about the external and strategic advisory group and what we talked about. First of all, I know yourself, Chair, and Belinda came to the last meeting. Thanks very much for your attendance. We talked about a couple of things, but probably most of note was a single assessment framework. We're trying to describe it in the context of what a year in the life of a care home, for example, might be. I think there's an importance there about gathering people's experience. Should be a continuous process right throughout the year. And there are also some questions about CQC, how we'll implement this approach to ensure it's consistent across different areas and different geographies. And we talked to a degree about the technology and the support for that in terms of how we can judge where we make decisions in one part of the country with the information against another part of the country, and how the technology can act as an enabler for those conversations. There was also, as I think I mentioned earlier, some conversations about the wider funding of services and our role in calling that out. And we talked a little bit about how we'd used state of care as a vehicle for doing that. And there was lots of concerns raised about long-term issues around funding, particularly in domiciliary care. We went on to have a first conversation about this year's state of care, where we talked about some of the themes of state of care. We particularly, alongside those things I've just talked about, we wanted to focus on mental health services for people, particularly for children, actually young people, as they leave child and adolescent services and go into adult services. We feel from some of the work we've had, work with groups, with public groups, and also from our own feedback, that is an area of growing concern. Just to say, in addition to ESAG, tomorrow we have the first of the provider implementation steering groups around the single assessment framework. So this is where that test and learn really hits the road in terms of the feedback that we get from providers. And we're doing exactly the same thing with regards to ICSs and local authorities next Wednesday. Final two things. We've got a Because We All Care campaign. That the next spike in that work is around deaf and hard of hearing. As you know, it's our year-long campaign to encourage behavioural change and support people to give their feedback in care. You'll probably know from the work we've done over the months that there's been a significant rise in give feedback on care, which more people trust in us with their information to help drive change and improvement in services. And indeed, it's formed a large feature of our responsive inspection activity over the last 2 years. This particular campaign been really strongly supported by Paul Kirby and colleagues in NCSC to get their message and their voice out about the deaf and hard of hearing audience. Future spikes will include long-term conditions, learning disabilities and autism, and also an over 55s group that we particularly want to focus on. And finally, we've just launched the annual statutory report we have on controlled drugs. As I say, it's an annual report, an update, CQC's oversight of the controlled drugs regulation during this year and last year. It highlights some of the issues that we found through our inspection activities, but probably 2 or 3 that are particularly of interest. There's a need for providers to include controlled drugs governance, the audit checks, etc., which were a problem before COVID as part of their COVID recovery plans, and the degree to which providers have got this as a focus of part of those plans is, I think, important. Those leading and working in local health and care systems need to collaborate to reduce the risk of avoiding harm associated with controlled drugs. So to what extent are health and care staff working together to make sure an individual understands that the drugs that they've administered, and indeed they are complementary to each other, and how linked to that, how health and care professionals prioritise and personalise the patient care in the context of controlled drugs, so how they really understand the relationship one has on the other. I'm conscious of time, Chair, so I'll leave it there if that's okay. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chris. You've also been busy in recent weeks. Any questions for Chris? If there's no questions, I'll just make an observation from my past experience, but I was pleased to see that we picked up on the online safety bill. I think there is I know from other quarters that these things can be a real risk. People don't naturally think about what is or isn't regulated, and to the extent they think about it, there's a presumption everything is, and it's a real risk if that's a presumption, and things that aren't regulated and are inappropriate are so easily available. So I think it is an important area. We may not be responsible if unregulated, but that doesn't mean to say there won't be concerns if harm is caused. So thank you for that response. Let's move on. Our next session is an update on the Learning Disability Programme. Kate Taroney, I'm going to hand to in a moment to lead this, but we are joined by Debbie Ivanova from CQC, who's our Director for People with Learning Disability and Autistic People, and Alexis Quinn. I know Alexis is known to the board and people who've listened before. I had the pleasure of meeting Alexis myself the other day. So Alexis, thank you very much indeed for joining us. But Kate, let me hand over to you to run the session.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. So the purpose of our discussion today is an opportunity for us to talk to board about the progress we have made in changing the way we regulate services for people with learning disabilities and autism following the Outsight report and the work of Glynis Murphy. So it's a chance for us to show board what we've been busily doing, but also to invite board to say, what sounds good? What should we be doing further and faster? Are we on the right track? So really welcome some challenge as well as I think celebrating some good progress that's been made. It's also an opportunity to think about the fact that we are starting to have this impact on services for people with learning disabilities and autism. Where else might we in the health and care landscape want to take a similar approach to the approach you're going to hear about during this session today? And then finally, we wouldn't have been able to do what we've done so far without our expert advisory group. So we have benefited from the start of this programme by having Debbie Ivanova's focused leadership on this, but also having a group of experts, people who have experienced this care and their families, really steering us on our boldness and our ambition on this front. And Alexis is a key member of that. So in a second, I will be handing over to Alexis. When I think of Alexis, I know Alexis is a mum, she's a teacher, she's an author. She's also someone who has experienced the most unacceptable types of care. And Alexis will talk to us a little bit about that now. And then I'm going to hand over to Debbie Ivanova to draw out some key points from the paper and then have a discussion that says, what are your reflections on how we're doing and where might we go next with this work? So without further ado, a very warm welcome, Alexis.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate. So I guess just a recap for those that don't really know me. So I was teaching back in a grammar school in 2013. I just had a baby, then my brother died. Really all I needed was some OT, maybe some psychological support to manage my autistic grief. But that wasn't available in the community, and I was admitted to a psychiatric unit for a 72-hour rest. Now, psychiatric hospitals and other congregate settings, exacerbate for many autistic people and people with learning disabilities the more troubling features of those conditions. Most of you will know that autistic people thrive, on routine, structure, predictability, and so noisy, chaotic, changeable and very sensory charged environments aren't very helpful. So as soon as those doors shut, I was overwhelmed, and this kind of distress cycle started, where I'd get a sensory overload, have a meltdown, be restrained, be segregated, and it would just go round and round and round and round, and it was very difficult to stop. So I was routinely restrained, injected, etc., and subject to mechanical restraint and long-term segregation. Now, in 2016, I escaped the hospital after my Section 3 had been renewed for a further year. I was about to be transferred to a medium secure unit. 6 weeks after my escape, I was back working again, teaching in a prestigious British curriculum school, and I now work at the Restraint Reduction Network. Now, in some of the hospitals that I was detained in, I was abused sexually, emotionally and physically, and the CQC were nowhere to be found. When they inspected some of the hospitals I was in, I was conveniently taken out on leave or I was secluded. And that happened a handful of times. If I asked to speak to an inspector, the answer was no. I emailed the CQC heard nothing. My family emailed the CQC and they were told that the CQC don't investigate individual complaints. The abuse I was suffering, and also, you know, lots of the community, you know, which I'm now sort of very connected to, have all been falling for many years on deaf ears. And, you know, I was pretty cross, to be honest, with the CQC, and I was reluctant when Julie Newcombe suggested that I work with you to do so. And I think many families are. And it seemed like, you know, you were looking for something and you were seeing something, you know, completely different to what our experiences were of inpatient settings. It was like a completely different lens, I guess. And then you started doing the RSS work, and I was interested but skeptical, you know, and I don't have much tolerance, I guess, for empty promises or some sort of political rhetoric. However, you guys have really delivered, you know, from the outset. You've listened to people, you know, you've included them, you've prioritized our voices and been true to know what people have told you, you know, and you now see, I think, what we're seeing, and your new inspection process is picking up on the fact that people might have a nice care plan, but actually none of it's happening. You know, or that for 17 people on the ward, everything's fine, but there's that one person, like I was, that was detained, you know, in a long-term segregation, who are routinely, you know, having their rights violated, sleeping on the floor on a mattress. And actually, you know, you guys are saying now that that's not okay, and you're not going to rubber stamp such things as good. So I think we're grateful to you for that. You know, I certainly am. So you might think, you know, that Kate and Debbie have maybe rolled me out today to say what a good job they've done. But actually, I think if you knew me, I wouldn't do that. Not if it wasn't true. For me, and I know a lot of the families that we're connected to, the culture of the CQC has changed. You know, families have much more trust in the inspection process, and believing that you'll follow through, you know, on getting safe, appropriate care for people. So I'm grateful, you know, that your progress report, your out-of-site progress report, actually told the truth, and that must have been a bit of a challenge. You know, we all know that care isn't where it needs to be, but not many organisations are willing to say that. You know, and it's us, I guess, that suffer as a result of that. So thank you. That's the end of my 5 minutes, I believe.
Thank you, Alexis. And people who've had the pleasure of hearing you talk or have read your book know that you tell it how it is, and that's why we have benefited so much by having you around the table steering this with us. So thank you so much for joining us, Alexis. Debbie, do you want to come in and just draw a few bits from the paper, and then we'll hand back to Ian as our chair to invite comment and challenge?
Thank you. Yes, it's great to have this opportunity today to look at what has been achieved and set our priorities alongside Alexis' really powerful story. And actually, I'll spare Alexis blushes, but hearing her speak was one of the biggest motivators for me to get involved and to lead this work through. It's also Learning Disability Week, the purpose of which is to raise awareness of what it's like to live with a learning disability, hence my very colourful background. So a great opportunity to have this discussion. I wanted to start off really by saying that leading this work over the past 15 months has been an absolute privilege for me. It's shown us, I think, what can be done when we focus in on people's experience and look at what does that mean in terms of stretching our role as a regulator, recognising our responsibility to be part of the change that needs to happen. It's not easy, and when we're taking a strong line in our regulation, in 27% of the 1,231 inspections in services for learning disabilities in the last year did not meet the regulations, so had breaches. 40% of hospitals inspected had breaches, alongside shaping that model of care in our registration. And you'll see in the paper, the specialist registration team has already had impact with 50 applications withdrawn before they get to being going into the process, and we have 11 notices of proposal in process at the moment to refuse to register a service that doesn't meet right support, right care, right culture. This inevitably has an impact on the market, and it's a difficult time, so it isn't easy. We've tried to balance that with seeking to improve services, particularly through the work on supported living, but it has to be the right thing to do. We need to be shaping the market, and we can't be responsible for approving more mini institutions where people live in large groups and their needs are not met, where they're not part of the community. This isn't what people want, and this isn't what evidence shows supports people to lead that full and fulfilling lives. So where do we go now? Well, looking at the year ahead, these are what I think we should do, and I really want to get your views on whether this is the right approach. I think we need to keep up this focus. We need to keep doing what we've done this year, plus take a closer look at health needs. Too many people are still dying young, and with now people being brought into the leader work, so the looking at the deaths of people with a learning disability and autistic people that happen too early, looking at community support. How do services offer the support needed to stop people going into hospital, not just to focus on getting people out, and also getting our staff to feel really confident on how they can be part of highlighting and reducing restrictive practice. So we need to keep up that focus. I think Kate already mentioned we need to look at how we can use some of this learning across other groups of people who draw on services. And then I think the other bit that needs to really tie in is we need to focus on ICS's responsibility here, how they recognise, plan and commission to meet people's needs. We need to look at this in both our ICS and our local authority assessment. So that's kind of my highlights, and I'm really keen to hear your views and questions. We've also got Rebecca Bowers here, who has been leading the work on inspections, if there were any questions around that area.
Great, thank you, Debbie. So back to you, please, Ian, for any comments, reflections or challenge. Or you're just on mute.
How can I do that? I was going to invite comments, but I see them coming in. Belinda, first to you.
Okay, hi. I read your book, Alex. It was fantastic, and I read it when Kate recommended it many months ago in one of your blogs. So I'm a psychiatric nurse, my profession, so it gave me a wonderful insight. So thank you for that. And I suppose my other two questions really are, how can you maintain the focus, so we keep it in the public eye, and what areas do I see it naturally lending itself to sort of a dementia setting, or we've seen problems in maternity service with people covering up what's happened, and there's been some concerns and lots of reports about that. So how do you see it extending into other services, mental health services? And also, people with learning disabilities do die much younger, as do people with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. So it's a big field to look at, and I just wonder what your plans are to maintain the focus.
Can I go first and then hand over to Debbie if I may? So, Belinda, if we think about how we are, how we've organised ourselves at the moment as an organisation, so the fact we have a director for people with learning disabilities and autism, we have a director for mental health, we have a director with a focus on inequalities and in integrated care systems. So, as I say, Debbie's leadership on this over the last 18 months has just accelerated what we wanted to do. I think keeping the heat and the focus and the pressure on through, we had outside, we then, as Alexa said, published quite a hard-hitting follow-up report that said not enough progress had had an impact on improving outcomes for people. So we will continue to shine a spotlight on this. We will continue to inspect and close services if they're not good enough. We will continue to stop new services coming online if they're not the model of best practice that we expect to see. So we aren't stopping on this agenda. What we desperately need to see is we need to see all the other parts of the system doing their bit as well. So as we called for a long time ago, we need that consistent crisis response in the community. That means that Alexis doesn't go for a 72-hour stay that ends up being a years-long stay with horrible outcomes for her. We need that crisis response in the community that just holds the person steady during a period of crisis, and we haven't got that yet. So we're not going to stop talking about this, and we're not going to stop putting the pressure on. As to where we go next, so your thinking is the same as ours: dementia services, understanding risk of close cultures on maternity wards, mental health, long stay hospitals, etc. There are many other areas of focus that I think we need to give a bit more consideration as to where we go to next, because it's a huge amount of work to deliver what Debbie's done, and we need to make sure we're prioritising the way that we need to. Debbie, is there anything you would want to add to that?
I think it just keeping up the independent voice publications, having a set of articles. So we're going to have the one coming out about acute hospitals and people's experience in acute hospitals in September, and then a little bit later there's going to be one on how autistic people are managing to access GPs and dentists and other primary care. We need to just keep that focus and keep looking at this as a whole system-wide issue and keep the attention, I think, on it, rather than it being stories of the awful care people are receiving. There will inevitably be those, because that's what is still being found, and we are still obviously finding those things in hospitals. But what we also try to do is each time that happens, have a really strong media statement around that. So we are making clear this is just not acceptable. So the focus is coming from both those ways, what needs to be done, but also where care is just not good enough.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're doing an excellent job in raising the standards and improving care.
Thank you.
Very impressive.
Thank you, Belinda, Kate, Debbie. Stephen Marston.
Thanks, Ian. And firstly, huge thanks to Alexis. I found that hugely powerful, very moving, actually. And I think what you did, Alexis, is kind of prove to all of us just how important the work is that Kate and Debbie and all of their colleagues are doing. So certainly from my point of view, I mean, strongly supportive of the work that Kate and Debbie and colleagues are doing. The bit I'd quite like to follow up, though, is where Debbie finished, which is sort of how would you want the role of ICSs then to develop in this space? Because we're just at a point in time where we can shape how ICSs are set up. We can try to define what good is and the capabilities that they need. In order to feed into that discussion about sort of the setting up and operation of ICSs, what would you like them to be doing to carry on and respond to the great work you've been doing?
So I think this is where there are some posts in the legislation who are going to be responsible for services for people with learning disabilities. But if you think about that, I think it's one or two posts, and then there's all these other priorities. So I think it's going to be very much about how do we continue to keep the focus that actually it's not just about acute care, it's not just about older people services, it is about a whole range of people. Mental health needs and learning disability needs often are the ones that then just drop to the bottom. So it's going to be about keeping the focus on that and making sure that people really do understand what is the needs across the whole of their population. So what is the ICS planning to do to meet the needs of people? Do they know how many people are out of the area? Do they know how many people need to come back? What's their plan for actually the community support, the services, the crisis intervention? What's the plan for those local services to actually meet that population's need? And then I think alongside that, what have they learned from the leader reports? What are they learning from those action plans? Are they implementing them? Are they checking that those are following through? Looking at things like annual health checks and the GP services, not just the numbers, but the quality. Are they looking at both mental health and physical health? How are they intervening early? How are all those systems fitting together to make sure that people with a learning disability have, and autistic people have access to the right services at the right time, and that preventative agenda, that prevention agenda, so that we stop those people going into hospital in the first place, is where the focus really needs to be.
You're on mute.
So I've done it again. Thanks, Debbie. I was just saying, I think we probably have time for 3 more questions from Sally, Mark and Robert. Take them in that order. Sally.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks to Alexis particularly for sharing her story. I live with family members with learning disabilities and autism, and I know how traumatising poor treatment can be. So you've been very brave coming forward, and I applaud you for that. I was trying to reconcile before today our report from last time, Kate and Debbie, which we spoke about in terms of the shocking nature of improvements that haven't yet taken place. And then today, which is obviously quite positive in terms of CQC and what Alexis has to say about our change in culture. My question is about how we hold other people to account in this. Do we have any powers to do so? And is there a role for people like Alexis and other patients and members of the public to be able to tell such powerful stories to a wider range of people than just our board.
Shall I start? So we, as a result of our original out of sight report, the Department of Health and Social Care set up a group called Building the Right Support, chaired by the Care Minister and the Minister for Mental Health. So that is the formal route where all the key stakeholders who have a role in making this change we're calling for sit around the table. And there is a route for people with lived experience of this care and families to influence that. And at each one of these meetings, Debbie comes along with her hard-hitting stories from the work that Rebecca Bowers and her team have done to say that we are still not seeing improvements when it comes to the quality of care. So that is the official forum, Sally, that the government has set up in response to our out of sight report, and we will continue to kind of challenge and play a really key role in that. Debbie, do you want to come in?
I think just to say that we absolutely know this isn't job done, and actually the report that the follow-up report to the out of sight that we brought last time actually so clearly shows that. But that is part of our way of putting pressure on the system, putting pressure on people to recognise that these changes need to happen. And certainly the Building the Right Support Delivery Board, which happened yesterday, the action plan should be coming out fairly soon, and there will be some working groups to take things forward. But there was a lot of healthy discussion about this makes it sound, by picking on 2 or 3 areas, as if a lot of the things are sorted and they're not. So there's a subgroup of the What's Good Looks Like, called the What's Good Looks Like subgroup, and Alexis is a member of that group, as I am, and that group is actually coming together to issue a report fairly soon, which we don't want it to be just another report that sits there, but it will actually indicate what all of the organisations who are part of the Building the Right Support Delivery Group need to do to change their principles, the actions that they need to do, and the way they need to move forward. Alexis, I know you're writing a forward for that. I don't know whether you want to add anything about the impact we hope that's going to have.
I think mostly my forward has been very similar to your out of sight progress report, in that it really is just saying how things are right now, and that we really don't need any more reports other than the ones that I guess you're doing, Debbie, to say, you know, things haven't changed, that you know, and that it needs to. And I hope that we're not here in 10 years.
Thank you.
Thanks both. Mark Saxton.
Thank you, Chairman. And firstly, Alexis, can I echo Stephen and Sally's thanks to you. I also found what you had to say extremely impactful, so thank you. I also want to say that the Glynis Murphy report had a significant impact on, I believe, all board members, and a significant impact on our organisation. But more importantly, it's our response to that report that we follow eagerly here at the board level. But I have 2 questions. So thank you, Alexis, again. You know, really impactful message or talk from you. I have 2 questions. I think they're to Debbie. So Debbie, I just wondered, alongside the rejection or withdrawal of poor registration applications, have we had an increase in better applications from more caring, safer services? That is a first question. And the second question, if I may, in terms of the change in our inspection approach, I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the training for our teams, and specifically if you are making some elements of the training mandatory.
Thank you, Mark. The first question I actually can't answer. I don't know whether we have an increase in applications for services for people with a learning disability, but what we do have is an increase in people talking to us early, which is what's really important, because it's at that point that we need to be able to shape the model. And that's not just in adult social care. So I've been having early conversations with NHS England at the moment about their plans for some of the hospitals. We do still have a problem about some of these things can just be built in already existing places without us having a say to it. So there's still some of those issues that we need to tackle. but people are beginning to understand that we have a model of care, and they are also beginning to talk to us early when they're beginning to plan. However, still too many things are getting to the stage of coming to us that are just not acceptable, hence the number of notice of proposals to councils that are in progress. The second one, I'm actually going to bring in Rebecca, because she will be the person who can answer that question for you best.
Hi, Mark. Yes, in terms of training, and hello everyone. Yes, we do have a training plan for our staff that is mandatory. We've got a base level of training that really does look at culture, mindsets of our staff to enable them to feel confident and competent to deliver our new approach to our inspection activity. So all our staff we expect that are inspecting services people with learning disability across the health and social care sector need to have attended that training and carried that out. We're in the process of developing a second stage of training with our national expert, which will be very much looking at restraint, seclusion and segregation, and actually how to identify that. And with that clear focus, as we've said, you said how important Glynis Murphy's approach and the report was around leading our change, and the focus on observation that we've used in our new approach has been critical to us understanding the culture of services. And so we're having a massive focus on that in terms of our ongoing development and training for our staff. So yes, and it will be mandatory. I hope that's helpful.
That is, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Colleagues, and probably last question, Robert Francis.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Alexis, for what you've told us and everything you're clearly still doing for us. And it's really arising out of your story that my question arises. I mean, for a long time, and it's not just in this field, I have long held the view that insufficient attention is paid to the significance of individual stories such as yours, in that we always look at things in a quantitative way and add up numbers, and the numbers often conceal the real evil that is being done to some people. And the question really I have is this, that when someone like you comes forward asking for help with your story, it seems to me that there are two immediate issues. One is really the core CQC business, which is what are the implications for the system, for the place where the service is being provided, and so on. But it seems to me that what you identify, and it's not just in the field of mental health service, is the gap about how do we then ensure that you, the individual who's brought this to light, who has lived that experience, is actually properly looked after now and then. Now, sometimes, of course, the story comes too late for that because we're talking about something that's historical, but quite often the story is something that's about ongoing care. And at the moment, I mean, we do, I'm sure, refer individuals or refer the story to a provider, that someone is accountable for doing that. But I just wonder whether there's a feeling that both we and the system more generally could do something more immediately to remedy whatever's happening to the individual who's brought us some appalling story.
I think any one of us could take that. If I kick off and then Alexis or Debbie, you want to come in. So in a situation that you've described, Robert, the first question will be, is this a safeguarding issue or a police matter? Does it need to be referred to a statutory organisation that needs to take specific action if someone has been abused? The other component is that if it's an individual complaint, then we've got our ombudsman routes for people to have their complaints redressed. However, we want to know everyone's individual experiences. And I remember Debbie saying to me early on in this process, she said, Debbie said to me, if there's a service providing outstanding care to 19 people, but one person is having their human rights abused, how can that be a good service? And I think that needs to be our mantra. If one person is having an experience like Alexis did in the service she was at, that is not acceptable. That is not a good rated service. So there is a challenge we need to give ourselves to say every individual voice is incredibly important, and we need to make sure that one person's rights being abused is enough to warrant us saying that a service is not meeting standards. Debbie, do you or Alexis want to come in?
Don't think I've got anything specific to add, Alexis.
I think you left the call I think she said.
Oh, she might have had to go because she's speaking at another event afterwards. I just think, Robert, it's really important that we keep a focus on safeguarding. I'm starting to worry a little bit about some of the thresholds of safeguarding and whether it's applied consistently across the whole country, whether it's applied consistently between different settings. Do we expect something different in terms of safeguarding for somebody in hospital, somebody who's in a care home, for example? So I do think it's a really important question. And whilst we can tell from the information that Chris gave us that more and more people are talking to us, I still worry about the breadth of people that are talking to us. Is it the person who's in seclusion? Is it the person who is detained? Is it the person with dementia who is in the bed in the corner of a large care home? Probably not. So we still have to really kind of make sure that we are reaching out in as many ways as we possibly can to get information from people. And I know Alexis did say to me the other week that she knows that people are still saying, I don't know how to contact CQC. So we've still got more work to do. So it's both the response in terms of safeguarding, the response in terms of listening and making sure that those people are then supported in that service. Because of course, as Alexis said, people knew she wanted to talk to us, so they moved her out of the way when we came in. So we just need to make sure all of the doors are open to enable people to have that say.
Okay. Kate and colleagues, thank you. I think to add to how impressive Alexis is, she is, as you say, speaking at another conference up in the north of England, so dialed in, stepped out of that to dial in to join us today. I think everyone would agree, very impressive session, and credit to the executive of the way that you know we start with a session, someone telling us how bad CQC was, even if that's offset by the major changes that some of the people in this virtual room have made. I think one of the challenges for us, and I'll just leave this rather than have another debate, but Debbie, you made the point about shaping the market, and that's a debate we've started to have elsewhere. I mean, we aren't providers, we aren't explicitly, we have no regulatory powers to tell the people exactly what to do, but I think there's a clear expectation we'll have a role, and how we can do that, I think, is a point we need to debate right across the piece, but certainly including this area. And I suppose as a related point, one of the challenges I always think with commentators on these areas, and Alexis said the one thing we don't want is another report, but it's one thing to comment on what is happening or not happening and to continue to do that. But I suppose if things don't change, then the question is, why not? And maybe it's related to shaping the market, but I think the challenge for us is to advise others on what policy interventions could be made that would make a difference. And it may be a series of them over time, but it's very difficult to sit back, know that you've got identified a problem and then just not see any changes. So I think a thought for the team and anything you can bring back to the board on what interventions are needed and any thoughts on shaping the market, I think would be very interesting for us. If I could close the session down, I mean, just starting again with Alexis. I mean, I think it's a shame she's gone, but I think her story is both shocking and inspiring. I spent an hour or so with her recently just to get to know her better, and I didn't stop telling other people about it for days, mainly the inspiring bit rather than the shocking bit. But I would like to thank her. We'll do that afterwards. But Debbie and Rebecca, thank you for joining us and your contribution, and Kate for leading that session. Very good indeed. So thank you. We're a few minutes behind schedule, but not too bad. If we could carry on, we're now having an update from the National Guardian. We're joined by Jane Chidgey-Clark. Jane, I can see you have actually joined us. So perhaps I should just hand over to you to give your update.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, board colleagues. It's an absolute privilege to be here again today. I can't believe it's 6 months since I was here before. I don't know where that time has gone, and on the day after Midsummer's Day. So time flies when you're busy, and indeed it has been a very busy time. And I hope that the report that we've laid before you helps to give some more detail to just a few opening remarks that I'd like to make, and then allow plenty of time for discussion, because I feel that's where the check and challenge and the would be really, really helpful for me as the National Guardian. So in terms of just by way of background, I come to the board on a minimum of twice a year. And as I say, I came last 6 months ago when I was new in post. And hopefully the paper will give you enough depth for the moment, but you will soon be having our annual report, which is due to be laid before Parliament just before recess. It's in its final stages of formatting and sorting, and that will be coming to the board to supplement what you have today. In terms of headlines that I'd like to give you, the network is ever growing of Freedom to Speak Up Guardians. We now have over 850 Guardians. It's increased from when the paper for you was written, in over hundreds of organisations. And we have a steady rise in cases reported to Guardians. Since the outset of the National Guardian's Office, we now have over 70,000 cases that have been raised to Guardians, which might not have been raised within their organisations had the valuable additional route of speaking up not been present. I am very aware that the Guardian route, as set out by Sir Robert in the Francis report, is an additional route from existing HR, direct line management, other routes of speaking up within an organisation, and they are all vital. The Freedom to Speak Up Guardian route isn't a panacea for sorting the rest, but it is an important additional route, and those cases continue to grow. What we do see, though, which is a real worry, is a steady increase in the proportion of cases where detriment is indicated. It is not huge, but for those people who are speaking up and then suffer detriment, it is absolutely can be life-changing, and so that's a very worrying sign. And I'll talk some more about that in a moment if you'd like me to. The implementation of the Guardian role in itself is work in progress, and what we see is variation in how the role is implemented. Clearly, individual organisations will have their own take on how they want the role to work for them, but what we do see in our recent survey, that there's a link in the report for you too, shows that some Guardians still do not have protected time to carry out the role. It is a busy role, both case handling and the proactive work, and if Guardians aren't given protected time in order to do that, then that may have implications for how they can fulfil that role in a meaningful and impactful way for the organisation. What that also says to me is the importance of the CQC's role in inspection of the well-led domain, and particularly when it comes to speak up culture, which is obviously the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian role implementation is part of that, and my team work really closely with your teams on that, and I'm really, really pleased about that, and I'll continue to emphasise the importance of that work, because without that regulatory support for the implementation of changes to culture in organisations, we're not going to get to where we want to be. The report talks about, lets you know about the new training that we've produced last month, which I think is 2 months ago now, on the final follow-up with Healthwatch England for leaders. And my ask of you today as a board is to commit to undertaking that short, sharp piece of e-learning training in order to then have the conversation as a board around, for your own organisation, you know, for us and CQC, how speaking up is going for you, both for internal staff and obviously the speaking up arrangements externally. And I think it's a really good time that that training is here, because I'm told that by the end of this month, NHS England will be launching their new policy on Speak Up, the universal policy, which will speak to all organisations with NHS contracts. That's including primary medical services, that's including obviously the trusts and wider. And what's really important, that will also apply to national bodies. So I would urge you to use that as a reset opportunity for your own speaking up arrangements alongside that guidance, and obviously delighted to speak with you about that. Final things I want to just talk to you about is a technical issue, and that's to let you know about a change to our complaints process. So historically, the way the NGO was set up, complaints were about the office itself and the way we conduct our business were handled by NHS England, an improvement. That now has been taken in-house to CQC, as indeed we work, and we are CQC employers, and Ian is our accounting officer. So the complaints process from the 1st of April is now sitting within CQC. So it's a technical change, but it's an important change to our previous process. I think I'd like to just let you know that there hasn't been progress, which is highlighted in the report, on the adult social care white paper commitment to working with the NGO, with the Department of Adult Social Care. working with the NGO to see how the freedom to speak up role can be implemented in adult social care. Unfortunately, due to some technical issues around funding release and vehicles for funding, that work hasn't been able to start yet because Department of Health and Social Care haven't been able to tell us how and when the funding will be, but I know they're working on it. So that's why, if you're wondering why I don't have a progress report on that really important piece of work, and I know Kate Tironi and colleagues are very keen to see how that work emerges to give that important speak up route to adult social care colleagues alongside health colleagues, but I'll keep you updated. Hopefully in my next report we'll have some movement on that. I think I'm going to stop there. There are many other items in the paper. I'm really happy to take any questions, comments, and hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Jane. Take questions from, I was going to say anyone, as Mark, I see you've got a question there, but perhaps Mark, well, let's speak to Mark first, but Robert, it might be useful to have any observations you have, given your links obviously to this function, and I suppose the worrying statistics that we see about things moving in the wrong direction. Any observations from you on that, and indeed from anyone on why we think that is happening? But Mark, let's deal with your question first.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Jane. Can I say firstly, I really like your heavy branding behind you as you're talking to us. I think that looks really great. And it's a super report. I did go into the annual report, Speak Up report, and noticed that last year the Speak Up was very heavily impacted by COVID, and a great increase in questions arising out of COVID to the Speak Up Guardians. I just wonder how you see that reshaping as we go forward, because I noted that, for instance, cases dealing with bullying and patient safety decreased in that year of the Speak Up Guardian report, and I just wonder whether you think there's going to be a reshaping going forward in terms of the cases that your very, very good system picks up and deals with.
Thank you, Mark. I think that's a really interesting and important question. I mean, it's we don't know what cases are going to come, what it's going to look like until we see it. I think personally, speaking to Guardians when I visit their network meetings and when I'm out and about, I think obviously items related to COVID, for example, PPE and things like that, that has all abated. So we will see a shift in those particularly COVID related worker safety issues that were being raised. I think from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing in the system, with the continued pressures on the workforce with recovery and workforce shortages, I think we will continue to see speak up cases around that patient safety and those impacts on workers. Sadly, I don't think I'm hearing that there's going to be a great change at the moment in the amount of cases around bullying and harassment, and also we've changed our coding to actually capture if it's not full bullying, but it is behavioural, if it's civility and respect, and we're trying to capture that because those are important issues that workers are bringing up to their freedom to speak up guardians as well. And I'm not sure whether that is still the impact of COVID. I think people have changed generally, society, I see, in terms of social media and interactions with people in terms of what impact, negative impact that might have had on wider behaviours, and maybe that is still being reflected in the workplace in terms of our health and social care workplaces. So we'll keep a very close eye on it. We'll be reporting that, and we will be trying to understand that with organisations, and really importantly, talking with organisations about what are you doing to overcome that, because that's the key to this, is the action that follows out from this information.
Thank you.
Ian, would you like me to?
Chambers?
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Robert. No, I did ask you to comment, so you come first, and then Mark will go to you.
Thank you. Well, I think firstly, Jane and her office are doing fabulous work, but I think we need to remember that the freedom to speak up agenda, and indeed my report, which was now quite a long time ago, is not just about the freedom to speak up National Guardian. That was but one of 20 recommendations. The reality of freedom to speak up and what needs to be done about it is that it is everyone's business. It is a cross-cutting agenda. It particularly needs the right sort of leadership, cultural leadership, and we had a bit of a discussion about that earlier. But if you're looking for one barometer of how effective leadership is, then look at their freedom to speak up figures in their staff survey would be a starter for 10. But there's no doubt at all, not confirmed by the figures, that the pressures that are leading against a freedom to speak up culture are increasing. And they're increasing in part because of the pressures of demand, the pressures from the top for results, but above all, as Jane has alluded to, the workforce shortages, which mean that people who have things to speak up about are increasingly pressured not to do so for entirely the wrong reasons. But people who are short of time, short of resource, and want to get a job done, whatever that job might be, don't resent being told that something is being done which is wrong, when of course they should, good leaders would accept and welcome that. This is of course not a problem that's limited to the health service. Those of you who watched that depressing programme on television last night about the problems of the United Nations would have seen encapsulated there all the things that go wrong with organisations that do not listen to complaints. So I think our role, if I may put it this way broadly, and I know we do this, is that wherever we go out, wherever we go and inspect anywhere, we should be looking at the freedom to speak up culture there, and not just about concerns, but how free people are to contribute towards the improvement of their organisations. Organisations where that is done, where there is a tradition of civility, of listening to people and acting on what they say, probably never need a freedom to speak up guardian, to be honest. But I mean, there is a long way to go, and this is a boulder that will continue to have to be pushed uphill long after Jane and I have left the scene, I'm afraid. But there we go.
You would have to challenge there for what we should be looking at in inspections, Robert. Maybe you leave that on the table for a moment. Just go to Mark, your question.
Thank you, Jane, and for all the reasons that we'd heard about. Your work is more important than ever. I was going to sort of echo Robert's point that the problems are not related to the health service, and there's some. One of the things I wanted to commend you for is your focus on one of the barriers to speaking up, which is fear. Futility is the other one, but that's relatively easy to deal with. But fear is the big problem, and safety in speaking up is quite an intangible thing to measure at times. There are some good measures around you want the proportion of people speaking up who feel the need to remain anonymous to fall, so that people are more open. But it is a really big problem out there. Wearing another hat, we did a survey across 10,000 corporate employees across Europe the end of last year, and 43% of people who had spoken up said that they had experienced retaliation. I mean, that's just a shocking statistic, and those people will be advocates against speaking up in the organisation. So you're really right to focus on this. And one of the things I would commend your office on for what you do, your efforts to learn and capture best practice from other sectors, and this pan-sector network that you run, I think is a best practice, and I would commend you for that.
Thanks.
Chair, may I come back in a moment?
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, could I just thank you for those words, and I will absolutely take them back to the team. And you're absolutely right, the learning from other sectors is absolutely key, both good practice where people are being challenged and also sharing our experience and the challenges that we are having. That just feels incredibly important because we haven't got it right. And I do just want to come back on that point that has been made in terms of the wider speak up culture. And I prefaced my introductory remarks with the fact that the freedom to speak up guardian route is just one of a number, and it's that wider culture. And I am consistent in my speaking about that, in my writing about that, in my encouragement when I go and work with organisations and talk with boards. The new national guidance to come reflects that, and obviously we're working really hard with yourselves to make sure that the inspection through the regulatory framework addresses that as well, because and indeed, you know, General Sir Gordon Messenger's recent publication of his review makes reference to the fact that sometimes speak up culture can be seen through a very narrow lens, and was encouraging us to make sure that we widen it. So thank you for your ongoing support, and I look forward to obviously presenting our annual report to you outside. It will be between the next meetings, and if you have any questions, comments, want me to come back earlier than 6 months, please just ask. Yeah, thank you very much.
Ian, Tranham, just to conclude, I mean, Robert made the observations of what we should be doing in looking at this. Do you have any observations on what we are or might be doing?
Well, again, I think it's something that we are already doing a lot of work in terms of looking at cases. I suppose probably the only area that I would gently disagree with Robert on was, I think he made a reference to counting numbers, or which may not have been the thing he said. But I think we do look at individual cases. Whilst we don't investigate them, we do look and say, is an individual case particularly important? And if it is, that may very well trigger an inspection and a deep examination of something. So I think we don't just count the numbers in this area. And I think really it's a question of keeping at it. Really, I think that, as Robert rightly said, this is something which is on people's agenda, but I'm not sure it's there yet. And how we broaden it out and how we scale it. Jane and I have one or two conversations around how to scale this, the influence of NGO, which may be something short of more Guardian. So I think a number of things really.
Thanks very much. So, Jane, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you for your report, and well done, even though some of the conclusions are a bit depressing. I think one point coming out from what Mark said, though, is that it would be wrong to think that this is solely a problem for the health system. To some extent, it is a societal problem. That doesn't give any excuses. Indeed, it probably just makes the whole thing a little bit more complex, but I think it is useful to bear that in mind. But thank you very much indeed for joining us, Jane.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. I look forward to seeing you soon and continuing working with you. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Robert, last formal item on the agenda is your update on Healthwatch England. I think we're being joined or are joined by Louise Ansari. So can I just hand this over to you?
Thank you. Actually, we're not. And Louise, I'm afraid, has had to present her apologies owing to an unavoidable diary clash with a legacy obligation in relation to her previous job. She assures me she will be present for future reports. So stepping bravely off the bench is Chris McCann to be the new Louise, at least for this meeting. So I'll just hand over to him.
As Robert said, I'm stepping in for Louise today. For those of you who don't know me, I am Chris McCann. I am the Director of Communications, Insight and Campaigns at Healthwatch England. Effectively, I'm Louise's deputy. So hopefully you've all had the chance to read the report that was sent. And I think it does give an outline of an organisation that's really sort of delivering at pace at the minute. I think Louise's note at the top of the report captures it well, just in terms of sort of the range of activity that we've been doing around, creating impact on policy and practice, highlighting the key issues that patients and people are experiencing in healthcare and coming to us with. So we've continued to have major impact in the media, particularly around issues like NHS dentistry, which is an area where the amount of feedback that we are receiving has expanded almost exponentially. Pre-pandemic, it was about 5% of what we heard, and now it's regularly pushing up around 22 to 25% of what we hear, and it's gone from being sort of relatively mixed to almost overwhelmingly negative. We launched our campaign on accessible information, which in the initial phase had a focus on people with sensory impairments, and that was an opportunity to influence the accessible information standard, which is mandated in the NHS, and we're moving on to focus on accessible information specifically around people who don't speak English. We had the opportunity to engage deeply in the delivery of the fuller review of primary care. We sat on the expert reference group on that, and we're very pleased to see some of the areas that we pushed on around community of care and the benefit of neighbourhood care teams being reflected in the final output of Dr. Fuller's report. We continue to engage with local Healthwatch to make sure that they are able to develop with the integrated care systems, which we know will be going live officially from July 1st. And we can also continue to roll out a comprehensive training offer to the local Healthwatch network to try and ensure that we're providing with as much capability and capacity to deliver for the populations of their local areas. More internally focused, we've had a complete review of our finance and procurement processes to make sure that we're properly aligned with CQC systems and reporting. And I would like to highlight the really impressive way that the CQC finance and procurement teams have helped us to develop that, particularly Ryan Mills, who's our finance business partner, and Ben Groves, the management accountant. So we've developed more aligned processes, and we've also developing new processes for our dispersal of income to local Healthwatch. And then I suppose it would be remiss of me not to mention the fact that in April we had the announcement that our august chair, Sir Robert, will be stepping down from the role in November 2022. Just to reflect on the high impact that Robert has had as chair, and how he has played a real role in developing and improving Healthwatch England as an organisation, improving our profile and improving how we operate generally. So I'm happy to take any questions around the report.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Chris. The message that you were playing Louise today haven't reached me, but welcome. There are no questions in the box at the moment. Just a quick couple one from me. The report did, in relation to Ockenden, say that we'll be undertaking work on maternity services to see how evidence can support the review. Can you just say a little bit more about what that will mean in practice?
Well, at the minute we're still scoping that work, so it's very early stages. So what we'll do initially is have a look at do a bit of an evidence review of what we already have on the books, and then we will go out to local Healthwatch to try and understand what they're hearing about it. Once we have an understanding of sort of that sort of background level of knowledge, we'll then sort of tailor our approach and see if we do some sort of bespoke engagement on it.
Sally.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Chris, and Louise in her absence. It's obvious that you're doing sterling work across a whole number of fronts, and the length of the report shows that. I just had a question about risk, because when you and Louise came to Audit Committee, you talked about funding for Healthwatch, and Robert might want to comment as well. But I noted on the report that you're now operating at about, round terms, 50% of the funding compared to the level when Healthwatch started. And that feels like a significant risk and a potential problem. And I just wanted to flag that again, because we've talked about it at Audit Committee, but we haven't necessarily talked about it here. So any comments that you have, I think, would be helpful.
That issue around funding, not just for Healthwatch England, but more broadly for local Healthwatch, is something that we're very attuned to. So in the network in particular, we know that there are some Healthwatch who are operating on very limited budgets, and we continually sort of monitor to see where those issues might arise, and we make interventions with the commissioners to try and see what we can do to mitigate that. We are continuing our conversations with DH about, how we can mitigate the impact of the reduction in funding, whether it might be something we can do in terms of how the mechanism of how how the funding is delivered to local Healthwatch in particular, just to create a bit more transparency. We also do look at opportunities to bring in income from external partners to work with local Healthwatch to help with their budgetary pressures. But I think, as Robert will confirm, it does sit right at the very top of our risk register, and it's something that we do put a lot of thought into and do a lot of work behind the scenes to try and mitigate those impacts.
Mark,
sorry, could I just come in on the funding point? It is a matter of considerable concern and of risk, particularly in relation to the network. There are some parts of the country where you wonder how they manage to do any work at all. If I can give you one example, and I won't name the part of the country, but there is one Healthwatch is facing a cut in its grant from with a local authority from over £140,000 to £90,000, and I'm talking about a big city environment. We are doing our best to persuade the local authority to change its mind, but what we're told is what they receive is a matter for them to allocate. Anything that the Department of Health says is but guidance, and they have a number of other priorities, which of course we all understand. But I personally fail to understand how any Healthwatch living in a big city environment can actually do anything effective at all at that level. That is probably the worst example I'm aware of at the moment, but there are many others. And it is an area of significant concern to me, as I indicated in my letter notifying my retirement. And I think we've just got to keep pressing.
That was very public.
Pressing the button on that one.
Let's take a couple more questions. Mark Saxton.
Thank you, Chairman. Chris, thanks very much for coming in and briefing us on this report. It's, as always with Healthwatch, it seems to me you go where the challenges are. So to hear about access, elective recovery, access to dentistry, GP access, digital healthcare, these are great reports to have. Just a couple of comments, if I may. One, when you say that the largely negative feedback that you're hearing, and this has a big impact on staff on the front line. And so I really hope that providers are listening to that feedback from you, because they need to support their members of staff on the front line and help to build morale. So I think that's really important. There's the other point I would like to make. There's a heavy emphasis on accessibility, be it the information standard, be it access to dentists or GP access. Can I make another plea? One of your great reports in the past was on patient transport and access to treatment and patient transport. It was an incredibly powerful report and actually got ministerial action. And I think, when we're talking about elective recovery and people coming back to the system, is how they get to the system. And, I've just asked whether we're going to do another report on that, on the transport challenges, which when you read some of those stories in that report, it was really, really challenging to read. So I just hope that you can, or that's in the plan for another future review.
We don't currently have a plan for a flagship report on that non-emergency patient transport issue, but we do continue to engage with that with key stakeholders on an ongoing basis. Like a lot of the insight that we based that 2019 report on is still valid, and we know that issues around patient transport were something that was a big issue during the pandemic and continues to be so. So although you mightn't see a flagship report like the 2019 report around it, you will continue to see interventions with us on the issue, and we do continue to press the case behind the scene on non-emergency patient transport.
Thanks, Chris. And I forgot to say thanks to Robert for his leadership of Healthwatch from a member on the board of the CQC. So thank you, Robert.
Ian, you're on mute.
So I have done it yet again. I was again. So Mark is still with us for a little while. So Robert is still with us for a little while yet. So we can save the speeches for later. Chris, last comment from you.
Just say, Chris, thanks for a great report. I just wanted to press that point about the partnership work. I think Healthwatch has been a really strong partner for us in our work. Everything from urgent emergency care, maternity services, ICSs and local authority dentistry. And particularly as we move to state of care, the work will be involved in the 5,000 Voices, where Chris's team are providing case study evidence of how people experience care across a pathway. I think that'd be very, go back to our early conversation and the point you made, Robert, about it's important to talk about the people's experience of care, not just a series of numbers. I think that would be quite useful and powerful in this year's state of care. So just thanks to you and the team, Chris, for that support.
Thanks, Chris. I do think there's strong relationships across the organisation, but I do know that Jacob and Ben, who lead our comms and policy teams, really do have a strong linkages in with your own teams, and I think it's a really mutually beneficial relationship.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed, everyone. Chris, many thanks for standing in for Louise. Don't take it the wrong way. We look forward to seeing her next time, but thank you for coming this time.
I'd be happy to stand down the next time.
And thanks for the great work. You note the report. We also note the funding difficulties. So there will no doubt one way or another be a resolution of that. But thank you for the update. We note that. We'll close that session. That brings us to the end of the almost the end of the formal business. Can I check with colleagues whether there is any other business points people want to raise? It doesn't look like it. So I think that's the end of the agenda. Just two other things, or one other subject heading. We do, as you know, and I'm addressing this comment particularly to members of the public listening, but we do provide the opportunity for members of the public to pose questions to be addressed by the board. We do have a couple, again from Robin Pike. I'll take them individually. The first was a question of how does CQC gain assurance that all patients in NHS hospitals are able to have visitors? Ian Trenham, perhaps pass that to you in the first instance.
Thanks, Ian, and thank you, Robin, for the question. Just a couple of things to say there. Really, there is published guidance on the NHS England and Improvement website. It's entitled "Visiting Healthcare in Inpatient Settings." That was published on the 8th of March. I think the latest version is version 4. It sets out the principles that hospitals need to follow, and that there are 4 key points to that guidance. Providers are expected to facilitate visits in a risk-managed way. Visits should be accommodated for at least an hour a day and ideally longer. There should be a maximum of 2 visitors at the bedside, and where face-to-face visits are not practical, then virtual visits should be facilitated. Additionally, there is guidance for maternity services, and that guidance was last updated on the 1st of April of this year. And that sets out that NHS providers of maternity services should facilitate pregnant women having a support person of their choosing with them at all antenatal, intrapartum, and postnatal contacts. And that support people and parents of babies on neonatal leaves are not considered to be visitors and should be not treated as such, i.e. they should be enabled to be there. And there are also recent government recommendations published on the 14th of April this year that visitors to hospitals should continue to wear a face covering. And I know Robin also went on to ask how are we ensuring that hospitals are adhering to these guidelines and recommendations. And the guidance and recommendations have been updated in our inspection framework for acute core services, which means when we go and look at acute core services, we take these guidelines into consideration. This means that when inspectors cross the threshold to inspect services, they are equipped with the most up-to-date expectations around visiting arrangements and can seek assurance those are in place for adults, for patients rather, and visitors. Where we do have concerns, these are followed up by the local team conducting the inspection. And additionally, our national centre has been coding inquiries by sectors when contacts are around visiting issues. And you'll have heard Kate Tironi talk about this in relation to adult social care sector, but we're talking here about hospitals in particular. and other NHS settings. And between March and May, there are 122 visiting frequently asked question inquiries, of which 7 related to hospitals, so the majority related to non-hospital settings. And this information is always passed to the local team, contributing to the wider ongoing view of quality and safety of provision. So I hope, Robin, you can see that it is something that we do continue to take seriously, and it links back to the guidance that NHS England produced on a national level. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian, for a very comprehensive response. And then the other question I'll take in the first instance, but might ask Chris Day to add. The question said, if the Commission decides to reduce the number of its public board meetings to 6 a year, will it conduct some of its strategic meetings in public as do parliamentary committees? It's probably worth clarifying a number of things implied in that question. So we have made the decision to reduce the number of meetings. To be quite clear, though, we're not reducing public meetings at the expense of others. Like I think most, if not all, arm's length bodies, we hold board meetings part in public and part in private, and the reduction applies to board meetings in total. So there'll be a similar reduction in public and private. As I said previously, that was a recommendation from the board effectiveness review, which is something we decided to accept. But I think importantly, it does bring us very much in line with all the other ALBs that we've looked at. I think the vast majority have 6 meetings a year, some maybe one less, 5, for example. So I think this is just good practice and allows us time to do things between meetings, which currently I think becomes a little bit difficult. We're planning for one meeting as soon as we finish the previous one, which is not effective. Compared to parliamentary committees, to be clear, my understanding of parliamentary committees is they meet in public only when they're having witnesses giving testimony. So I think the comparison is not quite right. But we're not proposing, to the extent we have private meetings, to in some way open those up. But I do want to assure you that we're not in any way attempting to reduce the amount of what goes into the public domain. So we have, as part and parcel of this, also been looking at how transparent we are as an organisation to make sure that we are putting as much in the public domain on a timely basis as we can. And Chris, you've been looking at this, so perhaps I'd ask you to add a couple of words.
Sure. Thank you, Ian. So we do, alongside the board, we have some regular contact points with both providers and people who use services. The first one mentioned today which is the External Strategic Advisory Group, which meets every 6 to 8 weeks, and it looks at some of the issues that CQC is seeking to drive on, both in terms of policy, in terms of what it does, but also how it improves care in health and social care. And we bring together the voice of people who use services and the voices of providers in those discussions, and I think they're very fruitful. But we also, CQC uses a wide range of methods to engage people to build what we feel a constructive two-way dialogue to people who use services and organisations. So last year we engaged just over 27,500 people in co-production activities, and so far this year we've engaged 14,000. We use a combination of face-to-face and online process to do that. So we have a thing called Citizen Lab, which allows us to develop and have conversations with people who use services and providers together on particular topics. And they've been used recently to help us to sort of have a view on our role in improving safety in maternity, and also to design our new assessment framework. So we'll continue to deliver and work with those areas alongside our conversations at that strategic advisory group level, in addition to the public board meetings that you see. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. And obviously we always keep that under review. So I hope that answered the 2 questions. I think that brings everything to an end. For those of you listening by the webcast, I hope you found the meeting interesting and useful. And we hope that RNT Willing will be able to hold our next meeting together as a board in Redmond Place. But thank you very much indeed, everybody.